Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar, Why Good Governance Matters, Best Practice for Public Entity Boards. I'm Lorinda Gardner and I'm pleased to be the facilitator at today's event. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on. The panel and I are on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and on behalf of everyone I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal people joining us at the forum today. I normally live on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I suppose one of the benefits of these sorts of online events is that many of you will be in all sorts of different lands, so that is an important aspect of today. It's fantastic that so many of you could join us for today's webinar. We have received over 1,000 registrations from people across Victoria, from a variety of health services, water authorities, education, local government, state government, integrity agencies, transport services, and many more. It's great to have you here, and it shows how important this issue is to all of you. Today's forum is all about public entity boards. Thousands of Victorians, including many of you here today, contribute their time and expertise to public entity boards. We play an extremely important role in overseeing our public entities and ensuring public assets are performing efficiently, effectively and managed in an accountable fashion. Again, the popularity of this forum shows people's commitment to this cause. Just a little bit about me. So I've had a long career in local government and state government, and been on a number of local government, not-for-profit and public sector boards. I'm currently on the board of the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission and a director of the Victorian Planning Authority, and until recently on the Commercial Passenger Vehicles Commission. So one topic of particular interest to me that's come up in the pre-questions is around culture in organisation and boards. And my time on the Victorian Planning Authority, at a board level, we've put a lot of effort into the culture of the board, behaviour of the board and how we work together. I'm quite confident this has helped in our conversations and decision making, and especially over this time of online meetings. But also putting on my Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission hat, I encourage people to have a look at Chapter 13 of Volume 2 of the Human Rights Commission investigation into Ambulance Victoria, and that chapter goes to the issue of what the board's role was in the Commission's finding, and this is something that Adam might touch on in a little while. So we're very lucky today to be joined by three speakers who will share with us their insights and strategies about the topic. In a short while you'll hear from Adam Fennessy, Commissioner, Victorian Public Sector Commission, Carly Kilgore, Deputy Commissioner, Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, and Diane James, Chair, Goulburn Murray Water. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during an audience Q&A session in the second half of this webinar, so I encourage you to submit any comments and questions you have throughout today's event by using the Q&A function, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. A recording of the forum will be made available on the IBAC website in the coming weeks, and we will also share the presentation slides. If you would like to turn the live captions on, you can do so by clicking on closed captions in the meeting controls. I hope you can all find this at the bottom of your desktop, or if you are using a mobile device, clicking on settings in the Zoom app, then tapping meeting to turn on closed captions. If you experience any technical difficulties, please ensure you have downloaded the latest version of Zoom. So the first thing I'd like to do now is to introduce the first presenter, Adam Fennessy. Adam Fennessy, PSM, is the Victorian Public Sector Commissioner and has over 20 years of public sector experience at state and federal levels, including 4 years as Secretary of the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, as well as the Department of Environment and Primary Industries. Adam has worked in the private sector as a partner with the advisory firm Ernst & Young. He's served on several boards, including the Institute of Public Administration Australia, Victoria, Infrastructure Victoria, Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and Women and Leadership in Australia. I would also like to congratulate Adam on his recent appointment as the new Chief Executive Officer and Dean of the Australian and New Zealand School of Government. This is a great role that Adam's taking on, but we'll miss him so much as the Commissioner in Victoria. Adam will be speaking to us today about the main differences between public and private boards. This was a question that came up a couple of times in the pre-questions, as well as the types of expectations placed on public boards and their directors. Please welcome Adam Fennessy.
Thank you so much, Lorinda, for that very generous introduction. I also want to thank Kylie Kilgar and Diane James for joining us today for what is a very important discussion, and I want to pay tribute to IBAC for co-hosting this with the Victorian Public Sector Commission. It is always important to reflect on why good governance matters, and in particular what it means for and why it matters for public sector boards. It's particularly important to reflect on this when we are in that part of the electoral cycle where it is an election year in Victoria. So I will start, or before I start, I also want to acknowledge that I and we are on Wurundjeri country of the people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of this session today. So as I start, I will make a few comments on the difference between private and public entity boards. We will have a lot of materials that we have published, and including some recent materials, so I will make sure that you've got links to those resources. That's where the detail resides, but I will reflect at a higher level on some of those key principles that Lorinda referred to in her introduction. I also want to thank you as participants for your interest and engagement in today's session. With over 1,000 people joining us, it just shows that level of interest and engagement. It is such a critical time of the cycle, and also always important to reflect on your duties as public board directors for the many of you on this call who are on public boards. I also want to acknowledge that there'll be some of you who will have been on boards for many years, all the way through from government boards to ASX listed boards, perhaps not-for-profit boards. For some of you, this will not be new to you at all. In fact, you could teach us some things about governance. For others, this must be your first time on a board altogether or on a public board. So there are some critical reflections that I'll share with you. And I also find that peer learning and peer discussion is a very important way to learn about good governance in the public sector context. So the first point that Lorinda referred to, what is the difference between public and private boards? The key difference I reflect on is that ownership. Who is the owner? So for private boards, you are there to act in the best interests of shareholders or company members. For public entity boards, the state is the owner of the entity on behalf of the public of Victoria. The state is represented by executive government, and in most cases represented by a minister nominated through the governing legislation or constitution of the public board. So where private board directors act in the best interests of shareholders, public board directors act in the best interests of the public first at all times. That is a key difference. The commonalities are things that you'll be very familiar with. Whether you're on a public or a private board, you act honestly and in good faith for the organisation. You do not misuse your position or any information you gain as a director of the board. And you have that duty to disclose interests when conflicts arise. So many things that those who've been on private boards have learned, including through AICD courses and so on, will apply, but with that key difference of the public ownership and the public interest that you are representing and protecting, as well as the criticality of working with your shareholder minister or your owner minister and the relevant department that supports that minister. So that's my first reflection on those key differences. The Commission, this is a question that comes up very frequently, including from many of you today. So we have published new resources for public entity boards on boards.vic.gov.au, and I'll share on my following slide in a few moments some of those resources. But that sets out in more detail those key similarities and differences and the specific obligations for you as public board directors. Now, on the slide that is on the screen at the moment, it shows what we require of public board directors. Now, this is set out in the Code of Conduct for Directors of Victorian Public Entities, as well as the Victorian Public Administration Act. So these are very specific. These, again, won't surprise you who are perhaps newer to the public sector. They make a lot of sense, and they are prescribed in the Public Administration Act and set out in that Code of Conduct for you as directors of Victorian public entities. So I won't go through them all, but you can see there that classic role of the board to establish a governance framework, set strategic direction, play an active role in the oversight of the performance of the organisation head, overseeing risk management strategy and performance. The two things I really want to draw out are, and these are the particular differences on public boards, informing the Minister of major risks and having that close working relationship with the department that also supports and advises the same minister. And the other one that Lorinda has focused on, I think this applies to all boards. We find this is critical for public boards, which is you as board directors have that responsibility to build that culture of integrity. It's a culture, firstly, of high performance, collaboration, public service for the services you provide or the public assets you are looking after or presiding over, and in particular, that culture of openness, accountability, modelling those right behaviours. And that culture starts with you as board directors. We ask you to set that tone from the top, model those behaviours that are based on those Victorian public sector values. Some of you will be very familiar with those values, and if you've ever walked down Treasury Place, past to Treasury Place, which is the State Education Department building, you'll see those 7 values emblazoned on the front of that building as a reminder of the importance of those values. Responsiveness, integrity, impartiality, accountability, respect, leadership, and human rights. Now, they are set out in much more detail in those materials that we publish, so I encourage you to look at our website, boards.vic.gov.au. We also advise, support and ask boards to act in an open and inclusive way with the important arts of listening and respectful relationships, and prioritise that strong culture of openness and accountability. We have found, and research that we have been involved in, as well as research more globally, tells us that diverse boards that have that diversity and inclusion of board representation better reflect the communities we serve and are higher performing boards and higher performing organisations. So diversity and inclusion, including diversity of skills and expertise, as well as perspectives and lived experiences of different people on the board, are a critical part of the success of boards within Victorian government. Again, we've got guidelines on that, and we'll refer you to those around how to ensure boards reflect the diversity of the Victorian community. We're also doing a lot of work to make sure that we are reaching out and connecting with parts of our community who may not otherwise see those pathways into boards. That's very important, whether they are people who identify with disability, Aboriginal people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So that's some of the importance of what we recommend for public board members. And you can see on this slide, finding it online, these are the examples of specific guidelines, everything through to how you manage yourselves as a board, manage your CEO or work with your CEO, and a reference as well to the Code of Conduct, integrity guidance, and the importance of diversity. The other comment I'll make before I conclude is that setting the tone from the top and making sure that the right culture of accountability is set, they are critical, and that also goes to how boards themselves assess your management and performance as a board, as well as the CEO. We've got 2 new pieces of guidance, assessing public board performance and how to manage your CEO's performance. Again, they're reflected on that slide that you can see. And we recommend you take this very seriously. We know boards do this. We recommend you're always asking that question, how are we performing together as a group, and how are we working as the custodian of our entity, including with our CEO. So I encourage you to look at those resources. And one very salutary case study is the IBAC, the recent Operation Maru, which involved the CEO of a Victorian Regional Health Service. In that case, IBAC highlighted issues around failing to identify and act on a procurement or conflict of interest concern was a critical failure, and pointed out issues with the board's oversight of the CEO. If that oversight had have been more specific, it may have mitigated through regular board self-assessment and CEO performance assessment, mitigated the risks and indeed the findings that of corruption and maladministration that IBAC found. So I do encourage you to look at those additional resources. We've also just published new guidelines on how boards in the public sector manage climate risk. We've worked on that with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. It's a very relevant question that many board directors ask us. These resources were developed working closely with government departments. We also reached out to many of you board members with significant governance experience. So again, go to our website, or part of our website, boards.vic.gov.au. If I can leave you with any final thought, is always think about the culture of your board and the culture you are setting for your organisation. I was very closely involved in the HERIOC report for Ambulance Victoria. I'm continuing to work in the implementation of those HERIOC recommendations. The Board of Ambulance Victoria is taking those very seriously, which is very important, and these are the very salutary and published case studies that we can all learn from. So I'm very much supporting Lorinda's suggestion. Have a look at that online report, which you can find from the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights website. So Lorinda, thank you for those opportunities to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for the sort of first point about stressing that public entity boards are there for the public. And I think you can sometimes lose that in the day-to-day discussions that you have about specific issues, and taking yourself back to that. I think the other thing for public board directors is remembering that portfolio departments have a role with public sector boards, and they can provide guidance and assistance to directors. So, you know, if there aren't any issues, that's a good place for you to start, is to go to your portfolio department and talk to them. So we're starting to see some questions coming through. Please keep submitting these you have for our speakers, and we'll get to these after our next presentation. I would now like to introduce Kylie Kilgore. Kylie is currently a Deputy Commissioner at the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, which we all know as IBAC. In 2019 and 2020, Kylie was the CEO of the Royal Commission into the Management of Police Informants. From 2006 to 2018, she worked at the Department of Justice and Community Safety on a wide range of justice reform projects, including in relation to the legal profession, civil justice, court programs, family violence, and the criminal justice system. Prior to joining the Victorian Public Service, Kylie worked in community legal centres in New South Wales and the UK. She has a Bachelor of Arts Law from the University of New South Wales and was admitted to practice as a legal practitioner in 2001. She's also a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Kylie will be speaking today about the key integrity risks associated with public entity boards and how to detect and prevent corruption as board directors. So please welcome Deputy Commissioner Kylie Kilgore.
Thanks very much, Lorinda. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting collectively today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I particularly note that IBAC are located on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I particularly pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of that group. As Lorinda said, I'm going to focus on highlighting some of the key integrity risks that you need to be mindful of, how to prevent those risks from materialising, and what to do if you detect corruption. So back in 2019, IBAC conducted research into corruption risks associated with public sector boards. As part of this work, government departments and public sector board members were consulted, and we also utilised findings from our investigations. That research identified a bunch of common risks that are highlighted up there on the slide. So things such as the failure to properly identify, declare and manage conflicts of interest, vulnerability to theft and misappropriation of funds, susceptibility to bribery and inducements from businesses seeking contracts or other favourable treatment, inappropriate financial practices such as loaning money to staff and use of public assets for private purposes, and poor procurement practices. Since that research was completed, we've conducted further investigations involving public sector boards. And as Adam has mentioned, most recently, the investigation that we called Operation Maru reported last year. In addition to the points that Adam has raised about what that investigation found, I thought it was important to point out to people that our investigation discovered that the CEO subverted procurement processes, failed to follow proper recruitment processes, failed to declare and manage conflicts of interest, and used the health services funds for very inappropriate and non-business related travel purposes over a number of years. The board were ineffective in a number of ways in their oversight of this CEO and more broadly, the governance of the health service, in part because of close personal relationships with the CEO, but also because of a lack of technical skills in being a public sector board director. An additional issue identified in Operation Maru was the culture at the health service, including at the board level. So we found that although a number of staff members and board members were aware of the CEO's behaviour, no one was willing to speak up about it. So turning now to key things public sector boards can do to prevent corruption. The first thing I'd say is that board members need specific technical training and support, and it's great that people have been able to access a seminar like this. I think that's a really valuable step forward. A proper induction program for all board appointees is very important, as are the written resources that Adam has pointed you to today. But it's also important that boards take the time to actually reflect on the technical skills that are required as a public sector board member on an ongoing basis. So that could be as a part of a regular spot on your board meetings, but it could also be that you need to hold specific board training days on areas for development that you as a board may have identified for your members. It's very important that extensive probity checks are done for all appointees to boards and particularly to senior management positions. In too many IBAC investigations, we find that probity checks have been bypassed or missed, and that has led to people being let into positions that perhaps they shouldn't have been. So that's things like criminal record checks, which are an absolute must, but also making sure that appropriate reference checks are done, qualification checks are done, and financial and private interest declarations are completed. Boards also need strong conflict of interest processes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more in the questions section. But what I mean by that is that you need to have practices in place that require board members to actively consider whether they have an actual or a perceived conflict. So this can be done, for example, at the start of each board meeting, but board members should also be mindful about considering this any time they're involved in something to do with their board. Board oversight of financial management policies and ensuring these are being adhered to can prevent the misuse of funds. And unfortunately, in too many IBAC investigations, we find that those policies and practices aren't necessarily in place. And finally, transparent procurement practices, including the board's role in oversighting these activities, are another very important prevention tool. And finally, encouraging a speak-up culture at both board and employee levels, including having safe pathways for complaints to be made. And this can particularly be something chairs of boards can lead. So what to do if you do detect corruption is occurring in your agency? I really hope this doesn't happen to anybody who's attending today's seminar, but it is important that I do point out to you that under Section 57 of the IBAC Act, the relevant principal officer must notify IBAC if they suspect on reasonable grounds that corrupt conduct is occurring or has occurred. Now, who your relevant principal officer will vary depending upon the statutory framework in which you're set up. We are always very happy to give particular boards advice about who your principal officer is, and also your reporting obligations. But it's very important that just at a high level you're aware of that reporting obligation and that you have procedures in place to report suspected corrupt conduct to IBAC. It's always better to report suspected corruption to us early we can then work on with you on whether it's a matter we need to investigate, whether it's a matter that you can investigate internally, or whether we need to refer the investigation to another agency, for example, the Victorian Ombudsman. In addition, individuals can also make a complaint to IBAC, and the details are up there on that slide about how you can go about making that complaint. We also do receive anonymous complaints, so you can just lodge what we call an information report with us if you don't feel comfortable about making a formal complaint. After today's session, we'll be sharing with you some of the key resources IBAC has on our website about dealing with conflicts of interest, red flags relating to procurement, and behaviours for organisational integrity, and I encourage everyone to engage with those materials. Thanks, Lorinda.
Thank you, Kylie, for that presentation. And, you know, some of the things I took away from that was how important those relationships are around the board table, that people feel that they can ask anything or comment on anything and not feel like other board members might be judging them about that. And that also goes to the relationship between the board chair and the CEO, which is not a friendship. It's good to get on with each other, but it's not a friendship. So there's important aspects to those relationships. I think the other thing is for people to actually read some of the reports on the IBAC website and the Ombudsman's website where they've conducted investigations, and you'll learn a lot from those. I'd now like to introduce our final speaker for today, Diane James, AM. Diane is a leader in the water industry in Victoria, currently serving as the chair of Goulburn Murray Water and previously as chair of Southern Rural Water and director of Barwon Water. In addition to her numerous appointments to state and national board roles, Diane has had a successful business career, establishing 2 startup companies and winning numerous awards, including as a finalist in the Telstra Business Awards. Diane will be speaking today about Goulburn Murray Water's transformation and what led to it. Please welcome Diane James.
Thank you, Lorinda, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share the story today of the fall and rise of one of Victoria's 18 water authorities, which caused a ministerial intervention and a report by the Ombudsman in 2018. And this turned out to be a catalyst for significant tightening of our governance guidelines across our sector. As you can see, Goulburn Murray Water, or GMW as we call ourselves, is a significant player in the Victorian water sector. We're Australia's largest rural water authority, and we manage Australia's largest irrigation district, including the Food Bowl of Victoria. But in 2017-18, it was in a state of crisis, which was unravelling. The $2 billion Connections Modernisation Project had been reset by the Minister for Water, the former Minister for Water, Lisa Neville. And in 2016, it was to be managed by a project control group at arm's length to GMW. This alone, I think, was an indicator that GMW was not trusted to directly deliver this important and nationally significant project. In October 2017, the Minister for Water, Lisa Neville, has been Minister for Water until very recently, as you know, and Lisa was my minister throughout my time with GMW. But before I started, she'd announced the establishment of a strategic advisory panel to support the organisation to meet the challenges of reduced water availability and changing customer needs. 3 months later, the panel produced a detailed assessment of our governance and structure, and particularly the financial sustainability. And they offered 30 specific recommendations to achieve annual savings in operational expenditure and capital expenditure. But added to this was an environment of hardship amongst the rural communities, which had faced both a drought and a dairy crisis. A lack of trust had developed. Negative media was rife, and there was a pricing submission pending. And unknown to staff, customers, and many stakeholders, a damning Ombudsman's report was about to be released. I joined GMW as its chair about a month before the Ombudsman's report was released in September 2018. The managing director left not long after I joined. It was my view that GMW's issues stemmed from a history of unstable leadership, a lack of accountability and poor governance. We'd had 10 managing directors in 16 years. There were cultural issues highlighted by cultural surveys. There was negative media and myriad complaints to our department and to the Minister's office. And for those of you not familiar with the investigation, this gives a bit of a taste. The release of this report was a very, very difficult time for the organisation. So people ask why I took this on. Why would you walk headfirst into a crisis? So there were a number of reasons. First of all, there were very good people at GMW, despite what I've just told you. The board of directors, the SAP recommendations that had been produced by the strategic advisory panel recommendations meant that there was a blueprint, there was a plan. And I'd previously led a board through a rebuild and transformation. So the first thing that I did was engage crisis managers and good lawyers before I needed them. I appointed a very good interim CEO. Many of you will know Bill Jabor, well known in public circles in Victoria. You need a trusted, steady and experienced pair of hands to keep the organisation running, and this is not the time for risk-taking. So everyone mobilised into crisis mode. On the day of the release of the Ombudsman's report, which we anticipated was going to be a very big shock to many people, we had tremendous support from both our Minister and from government. So Lisa Neville, the Department Secretary and the Deputy Secretary for our sector all came to our head office in Tatura, and we gave a joint and united presentation to senior staff. And then there was another one, the same presentation to our customers, and then we faced the media. And I think we got through this period by being prepared in advance, by being well prepared, but being very timely with our actions and being open and transparent. And then following that, of course, we recruited a managing director, and this was going to be a game changer in terms of success. If I can quote an AFL coach, Mick Malthouse, it's important to appoint the best person, not the best person available. We had to get the appointment right, and we did just that with Charmaine Quick. The next phase was to set about fixing the governance and reviewing our policies, addressing the recommendations, conducting audits, and making sure that both the Minister and the Ombudsman were updated with our progress. My role as board chair was to repair the board confidence, putting them back into the driver's seat, with me as the first among equals. And then to give the managing director the space to perform. So I remember Charmaine coming to the board in the first 2 weeks of her appointment, and she said, I want to spill the executive team and recruit a new executive team or reappoint some. And we said, are you sure? You've just started in the role. But she was adamant that she'd spent the whole of her January preparing for this, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do. And so, of course, that we'd appointed Charmaine to do a job, and we needed to give her the space to do that. So she put together, I have to say, a pretty amazing team. And then we set about the usual things that you would expect of strategy development and embedding our values across the organisation. And I know Adam spoke about the values of government before, and of course ours are at the bottom of this slide, and there's obviously a lot of cross values that we all share. So where have we landed? Well, the managing director is in the 4th year of her contract. I was appointed for 4 years again last October. So we've had the longest period of stability in Goulburn Murray Water's history, I think, or certainly in a long time. And importantly, succession planning is prioritised throughout the organisation. The Connections project, which is the largest irrigation modernisation project in Australian history, is now complete and with fantastic results. The fact that our water efficiency projects are now within GMW's umbrella is a significant show of trust in our organisation. The 30 recommendations of the Strategic Advisory Panel have been completed or embedded into our processes. Our pricing submission is completed. In fact, we've just started our next one. But we achieved a 10% reduction in customer pricing. These are the tangible things, but the intangibles are just as important. The trust and pride in our organisation is building. The media is more positive and complaints to DELP are minimal. I want GMW to be known not for its toxic culture or its leadership issues of previous years, but as an organisation that was reborn and came back stronger with a culture of honesty and integrity throughout, from the very top of the organisation. And finally, in closing, what happened at GMW is not reflective of the Victorian water sector in 2022. The key lesson for us is that it was allowed to happen, but it was a result of a much wider issue of poor culture and a lack of organisational accountability and governance systems. And if you have high standards of integrity and strong foundations, then the actions of two people at any point in time won't make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. And it's interesting reflection that you shouldn't need a crisis to put these sort of good practices in place, and you don't want to find yourself in the position that Goulburn Murray Water did. But it sounds like fantastic work since then. And a small thing is understanding what the impact on staff is when, as you said, there were good people at Goulburn Murray Water, and being conscious of the actions of the board can have a devastating impact on how staff feel about their workplace. So now we've come to the Q&A part of the webinar, and thank you to all the people who have submitted questions with their registration, and please do continue to submit your questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, keep our responses short, but there will be questions we unfortunately won't get to, especially with 1,000 people listening in. So look out for our follow-up responses in the coming weeks. So we might just kick off with a couple of questions. So one of the ones that has come up is, and this might be a really quick answer, and I'll throw this to Kylie and Adam, is there any occasion where it would be okay to bend or break the rules? Do you want to go, Adam?
I'll go first, Kylie.
Yeah.
The short answer is no.
And it's a hard no from my back.
And a hard no. I thought this was a great question to ask, and it shows how you've got to ask all the questions, whether you feel strongly or even embarrassed about asking any questions. What I'd say no, and if as a board director you do want to ask a question, can we do it differently? Is this the right thing? Reaching out, testing, asking is very important. This is where we encourage you to test your questions with each other as a board, with your chair, in particular with the department, and departments do have very good governance and legal teams. So the short answer is no, it's not okay to bend or break the rules. If there are issues when it might be a novel question or something that you have to try for the first time or do differently, or if it's just a good way to make sure that you're always looking out for those black swan or unforeseen issues, asking and reaching out is important, and sticking to the rules and not breaking them is as important.
I think it's really important that people remember the rules are really there to protect us all and to protect the integrity of our organisations. So it's important to think about why do we have those rules in the first place. And as Adam said, if you are in a situation where you think you might need to do something a bit different, it's really important to get advice about it. So don't do something without making sure you get appropriate advice from, whether it's legal advice or whether it is from your department or other trusted advisors that you can go to. Don't just unilaterally decide to do something unusual, because it often has a way of biting you on the backside later on.
Good answers. Another question is around conflict of interest. So I think Kylie and Adam touched on this, but how do directors manage material conflict of interest? What's your advice or examples?
Yeah, so Look, conflict of interest. It's not corrupt to have a conflict of interest. We
No.
all have personal interests. Many of us have to wear multiple hats because we perform different functions. So, say for example, Lorinda is a board director on a number of different boards, as well as she's got her own personal interests. What's really important is that we are able to actively articulate what those personal and professional interests are, and think about particularly the perception of, if you are involved in making a decision about something, particularly if you have a personal interest in what the outcome of that decision is going to be, you should generally step out, recuse yourself from making those decisions. There can be some circumstances where that's not possible, and so then we're talking about managing the conflict of interest. So that's about making sure that it's declared, that everybody understands what the nature of your personal interest is, that you're not the only decision maker. So, for example, it may be that it might have been something that normally you would make a decision on, but actually somebody else on the board should make that decision, or a subcommittee of the board should be formed to make that decision. The best thing to do is to avoid a conflict. If you know that you've got one, the best thing to do is avoid it. Don't be party to the decision making. In circumstances where that's unavoidable, put strategies in place so that you're not the person who's making the decision on your own.
Thank you. Bit of a double-barreled question for Diane, and that's about what did Goulburn Murray Water learn, but specifically out of that, around that, is how did you target and track cultural change?
That's a good question.
It's a double-barreled question,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So I'll start with the other part.
Yeah.
And it touches on something you said earlier, Lorinda, about not apologising for asking questions, and boards need to be very, very vigilant. And don't apologise for being that one director who can often be the thorn in the side of everyone, because you just want to have an absolute understanding. You want to make sure that you're right across what is you're actually being asked to decide. That's your responsibility to do that. So I would say board vigilance is something that we've really. It's about making the board, from the chair's perspective, it's about making the board comfortable to know they can ask questions. Now, if the questions get too much into the detail, then I'll have a conversation with the director about, is this question going to add value to your colleagues? That's usually the measure. The other is we went above and beyond in our response to the Ombudsman's report, and we added an extra layer of approvals. So for my claims for expenses would be approved by checked by the corporate secretary, and then sent to the audit and risk chair, and then noted by someone else. So we went above and beyond in our response. But one of the things, and I'll just bring this to a close, but one of the things I noticed is that we had the policies in place, but there was a systemic failure to adhere to our own policies. And so I think reviewing your own policies, we tend to overlook that, and that's a really important thing to do, to actually follow your own rules that you've put in place. And in terms of the culture, I just can't stress enough how important it is to read the raw data on the staff surveys. Boards really have no idea of what's going on in the grassroots of the organisation if they don't walk the corridors and really have a look and speak to people. And that raw data is something that your executives may not want to give you, and particularly if things are looking quite rosy, but that's where you pick up a few gems that you might want to further explore.
Thank you, Diane. And I think that it's a bit of a segue into another question, which was about, when you're drawn into operations in challenging times, and I'm sure that's what happened at Goulburn Murray Water, how do you then pull yourself out and become strategic again? And I think for all boards, there's legitimate reasons why from time to time you do get drawn into the operations of the organisation. Can often be because of a skill gap for a short term, as an example. But I think one way I'd suggest you look at that is to treat it like a project. What is the issue? Why is the board dealing with this in a different way than its normal governance responsibilities? And try and time limit it and then monitor it. afterwards. But Diane, you might have a few more comments about that.
Well, I think looking at it as a project is great advice, Lorinda. But I also think that you need to take as long as you need and sometimes it is necessary to dive into the operational detail, firstly to get a true picture, but then also to monitor as you're coming out of the situation. And it's about building trust. And I come back to the point that I made before about employing the people to do the job and then giving them the space to perform. And so at some point, particularly if you've recruited new management or a new CEO, at some point you have to stand back and become strategic again and let them take over.
Thank you. We'll just go to another question. This is a really big open question. What's the most important aspect of public sector good governance? Who wants to tackle that one?
I think the VPSC gets that.
So I'll go first with that. This could be a long answer, but I think of three things. And I learned this from someone who was a very experienced secretary in government and is now the chair of at least 2 government boards. The first thing that person said is, know your legislation. It's a very good starting point. Know what governs you as a board. Some of you will have very specific legislation. Others might have other founding instruments, constitutions and so on. But know your legislation, and that tells you what you're there to do. Secondly, know your owner or stakeholder or shareholder. And I've said in my opening answer, that is the minister and the department. It'll be the minister under legislation in many cases. Lorinda, you've also made the point that departments, and I have been a former departmental secretary, are a very good support and source of advice. Departments have a long-term corporate knowledge and history of the sector. I know, thinking about the water sector, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning does a lot of work with board chairs, with boards. There's a lot of learnings there. So know your legislation, know your minister and department and have strong relationships with them. And then my third answer, you won't be surprised to hear me say, know your culture and your culture. And Diane has said, look at that data. I know in that Ambulance Victoria report you referenced, there are lots of recommendations of how to get right into the detail of the data, but also knowing, as Diane has said, when to step back and refresh and reconnect with the strategy and vision of the board, but know those key metrics so that you're not missing things. And this is where published case studies are very sobering and very worth reviewing and revisiting. So know your legislation, know your minister, know your culture.
Thank you. Well, there's a bit of a theme here about culture. So there is another question around culture, which is, what role does culture play in integrity risks, and how can directors insist on transparency?
They say culture eats strategy for breakfast. I would also say culture eats integrity for breakfast.
Yes.
So if you don't have good culture, integrity risks absolutely will be live in your organisation. The issue of demanding transparency, well, you're the directors of the board. You ask the questions and you don't stop until you get the answers that you're after. And you make sure that you're getting the management reports that you expect and that you get the board papers, well in advance so that you've got time to read them and think about them. So I often have looked at cases where you can see that what's happening is that a bit of a snow job's being done on the board, and the board kind of sit back and are a bit passive about that and let people just tell them what they want you to know. I think you always need to be really conscious that you're in the driver's seat when you're a board director. It's your job to actually make sure that you get the stuff that you need, and that you can ask whatever questions you want and you stay there until you get the answers.
Yes. I think that also goes to the example around Ambulance Victoria, where there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data that both, I think in the Human Rights Commission report said, both the board and the executive committee, despite all of the data, didn't understand the problem and were shocked at what was found. So you wouldn't want yourself in a board where we're shocked to find out the level of serious issues that were at play. So just going on from what you were saying, Kylie, is how can boards create a safe environment where less confident or experienced directors can challenge their peers. And I think I mentioned at the start about the work the Victorian Planning Authority Board had done around building the team of the board. And a lot of that was about sharing our vulnerability with each other, and like an executive team might. But I think that's one way a new person would feel like they were an equal. So that someone else might have a view on, making it safe for board members. Diane?
Well, I think that the chair has a duty of care to the directors, but I did say before I still see myself in my chairing roles as the first among equals. But there's a line between that where I have to step up and be the leader. For me, creating a safe environment for my directors is equipping them with whatever they need to be the best directors they can be. And so I make sure that I have one-on-one meetings with them on a regular basis to just have conversations with them and to make sure that they have everything that they need, whether it's professional development or whether there's a concern about the way the meetings are run, but just to create that environment where they're going to flourish, if you like.
Thank you.
Lorinda, could I just add a comment to that? We've had a lot of interesting discussions in that diversity and inclusion context. I've made that point that diverse boards are higher performing. There's been some really interesting public discussion even in the last few weeks, mainly in the context of gender diversity. The articles about just add diversity and stir. So it's one thing to have perhaps more diverse representation on a board. The inclusiveness aspect is the listening and setting the right tone for those important discussions, whether that be a newer board member or people who will bring very different lived experiences or perspectives or just different ways of interacting with each other. So it's important that not only do we have diverse representation that reflect our communities, but the chair and the board are running those inclusive behaviours and listening so that we're not missing out on those gems that might uncover a risk or uncover an insight that will help us to improve. And so we're doing some specific work in the Commission. How do we best monitor and evaluate how we are an inclusive board? And that's where that self-assessment process is very helpful.
Thank you. Here's an interesting one. How does the panel think that governance can be more innovative and engaging? How do you introduce innovation in governance? Go for it, Adam.
Well, to me, innovation, again, and you'll hear me say this quite often, is driven by diversity of experience, by skills mix. Some legislation requires very specific skills-based mix across boards. Others, if they're not required, to me, diversity of perspective, industry, background, view, bring different ideas in. And the other point I'll reflect on, Diane's referred to this, as well as knowing what's going on in the organisation. So being able to go in to look and then pull yourself back out to the strategic level, there's also that contact with what's going on in your industry, in adjacent industries, and how you learn. And this is where I have found that having board directors who are on a couple of different boards really helps, because you might see what's happening in the human rights space, Lorinda, and then ask, well, what are we doing about that in the planning context, just to use you as an example.
Yes, that's right.
That's also why in a lot of the work I did when I was in DELP, we were keen not just to have people from that profession retire and move to those boards. We wanted diversity of experience and background on those boards. So you might have a health board director who might go onto a TAFE board or onto a water authority, and also that regional connection with people who understand local communities helps tap into the currents of innovation and latest thinking. So that's what we've learned in the VPSC.
Can I just add to that? I always find it interesting, the skills matrix, when people will say, oh, you need a lawyer on your board. And I say, no, we don't need a lawyer. We need to buy the very best legal advice we can get. Because if we put a lawyer on the board, they become the de facto lawyer for the organisation. Everybody gravitates to them and looks at them in the board meeting. So that diversity of skills, I always ask for a CEO, if I could have one, someone who's run a big organisation and has that mindset, because that's a really useful mindset to bring to the board discussions. And people with just very general skills as opposed to those with specific. Obviously we need to have accountants and financial skills. That's a no-brainer. But I like generalists as well, people with life skills, and I love some younger people on my boards too, just to bring a youth perspective. We don't get enough of them nominating.
The other thing I think is you do need someone on the board with public sector experience. And I've one of the boards I've been on, it's actually teaching people about there is a minister and there is a department and there is finance directions, and these things are really important, and this is how the system works. And I think that's really important for people that have come from a non-public sector background. I think we need to conclude the questions section now. So thank you all for joining us today, and a big thank you to Adam, Kylie and Diane, and all the attendees and organisers for your contribution to today's webinar. Before we wrap up, I'd like to mention that we will send you links to any resources mentioned today throughout the session, as well as slides and the recording to today's webinar, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. In addition, I think Adam's talked about this, the Victorian Public Sector Commission has very recently published a comprehensive suite of governance resources, which I actually helped develop.
You did?
So look out for that on Board's Vic website. And to keep updated on the latest publication information from IBAC, you can subscribe to IBAC's e-newsletter Insights. You can also follow the Commission and IBAC on Twitter and LinkedIn, so check those pages for regular updates. And I think one thing that I'd advise boards to do is pick up some of the IBAC or Ombudsman's reports and use them as a basis of a conversation around the board table. It's a good way of learning. So finally, as this webinar comes to an end and you exit Zoom, you will see a link to complete a short feedback survey to help us to plan future events. So it would be appreciated if you could provide us with your thoughts on today's webinar, as will help us plan future events. So we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks and goodbye for now. Thank you, everyone.